Are you saying things like, oh my God, I am so over this pregnancy, or this baby needs to hurry up and get itself born, or if I haven't had this baby in the next week, I'm going to ask for an induction? Hi, I'm Kathy Fray, and I'm a semi-retired senior midwife and a best-selling maternity author, and welcome along because I want to talk to you about this situation. So, firstly, I need to clarify that feeling thoroughly over being pregnant is a very normal and important a part of the maternity journey that needs to occur. In my experience, after dealing with thousands of women, I think it's ideal that the woman has got to that point mentally and emotionally of being thoroughly over and fed up with the pregnancy for a good 1 to 4 weeks prior to her spontaneously going into labor. That's perfect. That's ready, because it's a really critical thing that you get to the point where you're so over the pregnancy that you want the pains of contraction, or the pain of contractions. You want it. You're in that situation going, oh my God, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on. Because now you're seeing that the contraction pain is potentially a better option than staying pregnant. And you need to get mentally to that headspace. It's so important. And, when you see women who are, have had a preterm, unexpected, labor, giving birth to a premature baby, those women have a whole other set of consequences that they're dealing with. And they've never got to that point of being really over the pregnancy and ready, and going from not being ready to having a baby in your arms is a huge shock as well. So just know that when you get to fully term, you're over 37 weeks, and somewhere in that next 5 weeks, you're having a baby. Somewhere between 37 and 42 weeks, you're having a baby. Hallelujah. It's all great. And celebrate the fact that you've got to term, because a lot of women don't. Okay. So know that that's normal. All right. But here's the thing. When you get to that point, you should never, ever, ever be wanting an induction. Never want an induction. And I'll go through the reasons why. Okay, and you want to be aware of that, because that's about informed consent, right? So you consenting to an induction means you need to know the statistical outcomes of them. So let's talk about that. Okay, so let's see my little notes here. Now, just a quick aside, when we have these babies, we know that somewhere in around probably, 14 years later or thereabouts, you are going to have to be doing some tough love on your child at some point in their life. And what is tough love? Well, that is defined as the practice of being very strict with someone in order to help them overcome a problem with their behavior. And that's what I'm going to do here. I don't want to offend anyone, but this is time for tough love. Because although you can make the decision to do an induction, you don't have enough experience to make the wise decision on that until you've got the information, right? Yeah. So requesting an induction when it's not absolutely categorically medically indicated as the safer option than you continuing to be pregnant, if it's not medically indicated then that for that purpose, then you have been induced makes as much sense as that you've got a fire burning in the fireplace in your lounge and you're getting frustrated that it's not heating the room fast enough. So you're just going to light the curtains, because if you light the curtains, man, the room is going to heat up real quick, right? But the consequences and the regrets of those consequences can be massive. Okay, so let's go through it. All right, so short term and long term I'm talking about, and then I'm also going to head you into the direction of how to naturally induce yourself, which is a two-part thing. Step 1 is ripening the cervix, and step 2, excuse me, is once you have a ripe cervix, then how do you induce your uterus to start to contract? Okay, so short-term and long-term consequences of inductions on mothers and babies. Okay, so with short term, because inductions lead to higher, it takes a low risk to high risk labour, and then that will lead to higher levels of instrumental vaginal deliveries like ventouse and forceps, and higher levels of emergency surgical deliveries, which is a C-section. So that leads to higher rates of maternal hemorrhaging and higher rates of maternal admission to theatre, to HDU, high dependency unit, and to ICU, intensive care unit. There are, in the short term, lower level amounts of genital tract and vaginal tears, higher amounts of perineal tearing and perineal pain, such as from episiotomies, which are needed for instrumental deliveries, higher rates of injuries to the mother's bladder, urethra, which can lead on to urinary incontinence, and higher rates, unfortunately, of the major obstetric emergency of a uterine rupture. For the baby, short-term issues are dramatically increased rates of admission to NICU or SCIBU, that's neonatal intensive care unit or special care baby unit, and also reduced average ABGAR scores. And ABGAR scores are the general condition of the baby that are measured at 1 minute, 5 minutes, and sometimes 10 minutes onwards, etc., depending on how poor the condition is of that baby's arrival. And also increased rates of respiratory distress and breathing issues, particularly with C-sections, and more frequent illness as a neonate, lower food demand, just disinterested in feeding, because typically it's got a headache, and fewer hours of it sleeping contentedly, again, because it can have a headache, and then longer term things can be traumatic brain injuries that will cause from skull fractures, brain bleeds, and leading on to seizures. For the long term, for the mother, with instrumental delivery, she can have long-term urinary incontinence, which is weakening of the muscles and ligaments in the pelvic organs, such as organ prolapse. This is all statistically higher. And with C-sections, she can have increased rates of headaches, back pain, hip pain, lower abdominal aches, breastfeeding problems, and problems with daily activities. And these are all long-term issues. For the baby, higher rates with the instrumental deliveries, there can be higher rates of functional impairment to feet, legs, vision, and particularly the retina. There are higher rates of facial palsy, which is like a muscle weakness problems, a bit like when someone's had a stroke, and higher rates of nerve damage injuries, such as Erb's palsy, which is when you see somebody, they sort of have they're like this. They kind of have their hand all like that. That's Erb's palsy. And that's because the brachial nerve has got damaged. Higher rates of traumatic brain injury, which I've mentioned, and with the C-section delivered children, they have higher rates of allergy, so that's like eczema, dermatitis, rhinitis, and high levels of asthma. The theory on that is because it's from altered immune development. They've also got higher levels of obesity in childhood going forward, and the hypothesis in that is because the gut microbiome diversity is altered, or it's at least contributing to the obesity, and there's also higher levels of behavioural problems with C-section babies statistically as children, but the cause is unknown on that one. Research continues. So, yeah. All right. But it's fine to be inducing yourself naturally. You just don't want the medical inductions where it's involving things like oxytocin drips, artificial rupture of membranes, which typically lead on to epidurals, etc. It's just a whole cascade of intervention. But for ripening the cervix and then triggering a ripe cervix into labour, go to my other little video, which is called How to Induce Natural Labour. Ta-da! So we've just squeezed that into under 10 minutes. A lot of information. Hopefully I haven't freaked you out completely, or maybe I have, and maybe that's a good thing, because maybe you're going to sit back and go, yeah, I don't mind waiting another 1 or 2 or 3, 4 weeks for this baby to arrive. I am not going to request and induction. Okay, bye everybody.